The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame. Welcome back to The Short Game, the show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Raygan Kelly, and I'm joined this week by my original co-host,
Nate Heininger. Wow, what a title.
Yeah, dude. It was you and me, and then
that's right.
My brother as an afterthought.
And then eventually we thought the show should be good, so we brought in Laura, and here we are, 300, and I think this is going to be episode
350th episode.
Yeah.
Not including some, variety extras that didn't get numbered.
350th mainline episode, so here we are.
Long time.
Yeah.
Here we are, and we're talking about a game that I was really interested in playing, mostly based on the strength of its art, because if you put a game with black and white 1-bit art in front of me, I will want to play it. That is a style that gets directly into my brain and makes me want to play it. And this is UnderDungeon. And I honestly don't remember where I saw this first. I think I saw it somebody posted like a trailer on Mastodon or something like that. And I just saw the 1-bit art and added it to my list.
Yeah, and that was really what compelled me too. Once you sort of shared it with us, I love games of this type, and that pixel art was gorgeous. So I thought, yeah, let's give it a shot, and played it on my Steam Deck, which was a great way to play it. And I think we have a lot of thoughts on this game, but I will say that the reason we wanted to play it was the pixel art. And it definitely delivered. So
yes, yeah, the pixel art is fantastic. This is a mostly top-down sort of Zelda-style flip screen adventure game. So you are playing as a little guy named Kimuto. I believe he's meant to be a cat, but really he looks like Kirby with ears. He's kind of like a round body, a little sphere. Actually, you know what I was reminded of a lot, and maybe it was also just because it's the like 1-bit art, but like those ZX Spectrum egg games. What was that guy's name? There's like a retro game thing with an egg protagonist that's like...
You're the only person I know who would know the answer to this. So
what's it called? I'll think of it 30 minutes into this episode. And I'm just going to yell, it's like Egg Bird or something, but it's not that. It's Dizzy.
All right.
It reminds me of Dizzy because for the ZX Spectrum, because it's a British like series of like platform adventure games. That was a comment for no one. Thank you. But this guy looks like an egg with little sphere hands and little sphere feet and little cat ears. And he is exploring a 1-bit black and white styled pixel art world that very much reminds me of the sort of ZX Spectrum or maybe Macintosh original graphical era. But the gameplay is a lot more in line with like the NES style. It's got the flip screens, so move from one screen to the next, and the screen will sort of scroll all in one go. No like smooth scrolling between areas, and top down Zelda style exploration. But it's got a kind of a funny it's got a very kind of modern feel to its humor and kind of story, I guess, set up.
Yeah. I think the game, like a lot of games, but this one in particular, is heavily influenced by Undertale. I've wondered if the title is even maybe a reference to that.
I didn't really think about Undertale while I was playing it. I guess you're right. I mean,
but there's a part where you're a little heart dodging things on the screen. So
that was like a clear like reference. Yeah. So that it does have a moment where it like does what seems to be a very specific Undertale nod.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It feels more it's very obvious to say that it's Zelda inspired. It looks so Zelda-y. Sure. But it seems more like, I'm not sure what to say about it, other than that it's definitely like got the sort of top-down action adventure thing going, and there's lots of those now.
There are some things that happen later in the game too that I don't really want to spoil. That makes me think it was pretty inspired by trying to do something similar to Undertale, interacting with the player and stuff like that.
Yeah, I should probably say right up front, Nate has finished this game and I have not. And we're going to talk about what we liked about the game first, but the main reason I have not was that I played about 2.5 hours of this game. I don't know how long you think you might have played, Nate. Maybe I think it's supposed to be about a 4 or so.
Probably around 4 or 5 hours. It was, a short game.
And I kind of fell off of it, not because I ran out of time, but because I kind of ran out of gas. This one didn't quite grab me very much. And we don't often do episodes on games that we just sort of kind of like, you know what I mean? We love to love things. We love to talk about games that we love. But hey, I hadn't really played anything else this week. Here you go.
So I've been thinking about that too, because usually if there's a game that we didn't really care for, and though I completed it, I am pretty aligned with Raygan on my overall opinion on this game. Normally when we encounter a game like that, we just say, let's not do it for the show, because like Raygan said, we just like to celebrate great games. But I do think this game is still worth discussing, because there are some really high highs in this game. Like the pixel art, like we were talking about, is really, really good. And I think the sound is good. And I think generally it has a cute vibe and an overall like kind of fun story. It's just ultimately like the gameplay was not super exciting, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, and specifically the combat. Like this is it's a combat focused game. There are puzzles, but they're not super in depth or really all that interesting. They're sort of very basic Zelda style puzzles. And it has some cool twists. We'll talk about those too. But for the most part, a lot of this game you are spending exploring dungeons or dungeon-like areas, and you're going around with a sword or some other more creative. I liked some of the weapons in theory, but none of them really just like felt like fun to use. You know what I mean?
So let's talk about what you're actually doing in this game. So you play as Komoto or Kamuto.
I was saying Kimuto in my
Kimuto. Okay,
with a little exclamation point at the end. I don't know, something about him.
Yeah, high energy high energy cat who has gotten a job at a basically an Amazon, and analogous to Amazon, a massive company that delivers anything to anyone anywhere. And so you've gotten a job as a delivery person. And the sort of frame of this game is that you start in your office headquarters. There's a bunch of, fun little friends you can meet around in the office headquarters. A lot of jokes on people being overworked and hating their job. And then you get a phone call from someone who needs a delivery, and you go and make that delivery. And then every time there's something going on at these delivery destinations.
Yeah, go and deliver to a dungeon, a haunted cemetery, etc. You're never just going to a house. And each of the setups has little puzzles to solve in order to get to where you need to be to deliver your package.
Yeah, it's a world that is populated by monsters, and part of the delivery job that you take when getting it is you're ready to fight monsters, right? Because that's what we do. There's kind of a funny joke where they try to give him a sword and he's like, no, I'm a wizard. I can't hold swords. I can summon swords. And I think it's also supposed to explain that why he doesn't why he doesn't have hands, why the sword doesn't sit in his hands. Which I thought was a good way to handle one bit art. Everything here is magic and weird. So
yeah, that was a good bit, and it plays into the I think that the combat has one really interesting thing going for it, and that was that I thought the weapons had some good variety. I especially thought the first thing you get is a sword, but it doesn't just have the sort of sword swing feel that you have in a lot of other games. You hit a button and the sword sort of appears and does a very deliberate arc around you in a particular direction, whichever direction you're facing. But it's pretty short range and you can't just hammer on it. It always swings at exactly the same kind of deliberate pace. Mm-hmm. And then you get other attacks eventually as well. One of the more interesting ones was a sort of bubble attack where you can shoot a bubble at an enemy, and if the enemy has been weakened, basically if you hit them with like a couple of bubbles, then they get trapped in the bubble and float towards the wall wherever you were pointing. And eventually the bubble will pop and that destroys the enemy, or you can go and pop it in advance.
Yeah. Which
and
is fun. Like, I like this is where, again, that 1-bit art, like they do some really cool and fun things with it, where you trap the monster in a little bubble and it shrinks down and it's spinning and like sort of like sweat bubbles coming out of it, and then it pops and everything you kill drops money, and there's a lot of like really cool little design going on in these moments. And yeah, the bubble gun I used a fair amount because it gave you actual range. And there's like a chainsaw thing, or not a chainsaw, but like a disc saw you can throw around.
Yeah, that was interesting. It felt like a reference to, I think Rygar is the game it was kind of going for, where you have the axe blade thing that you kind of throw, because it had the similar kind of thing where you throw it out and it'll come right back to you like a boomerang, or you can hold down the button and it sort of stays out for a little while longer.
Yeah.
And you also get a hook shot that was fun to use.
It was fun to use. Good. Really challenging to actually use in combat.
Yeah, because it did a lot of damage, and it would then pull you into.
So I was rarely using it in combat, but I think they kind of knew that too, because later in the game there's a bunch of traversal that requires the hook shot. So I don't think they necessarily expected you to use the hook shot as a primary weapon. However, every weapon does have there's a basic attack, and then there's sort of a power up attack that generally takes it from a like single use attack the thing directly in front of you into a like area of effect, attack the entire screen, or at least a wider range. And the hook shots was a really good one.
Yeah, so I did enjoy all of the weapons in theory. In actual practice, some of them, in fact, all of them felt a little lackluster to me. But it gets some points for variety with them. I think the bubble weapon was something that I don't think it reminded me. All of the weapons kind of reminded me of something from other games. They all felt like little nods. The bubble weapon really felt like Bubble Bobble. Where you are, that's a platformer rather than an adventure style thing. But like you do like hit an enemy with a bubble and they get trapped in it and float away and pop in much the same way they do here. The axe felt like a Rygar thing. The sword swinger, it was, everything has a sword, but it felt very weird. It kind of reminded me, I've played some like top down shooters that have sword mechanics that work the same way. Where it has like, it doesn't, it doesn't feel like you're swinging a sword. It feels more like you are summoning a sword that does a swipe and then vanishes. And it always executes exactly the same arc at a kind of a slow speed. The hook shot obviously felt sort of Zelda-y to me. Everything has a hook shot in every good Zelda has a hook shot.
Of course.
Don't at me. And I'm trying to think, were there any others that I'm missing? Oh, the weird thing about the secondary mode or like area of effect things that they did. I wasn't ever really sure how. So they have like, you have a pool of little crystals that you use or expend to do those. And that felt really weird to me because I wasn't ever really completely sure how those got refilled.
I can at least explain that, but I agree. Like, I ultimately just didn't use them a lot.
Yeah, me neither.
Sometimes during the boss fights, I would just spam them just because I have them,
Yeah, but it didn't feel worth using them because you had such a limited pool of them, and you could use items to refill that pool of crystals. But like you'd have like 4 shots with these things, and they didn't feel like they weren't like screen clearing, like destroying machines. They were just like a different kind of attack, and you could only do it like 4 times until you figured out how to refill it. It felt really like there wasn't enough of that, and in order to make it something that I ever like internalized how to use or when to use.
Yeah, there's an entire item system with buffs and power-ups and replenishments and whatnot, and by the end of the game I was using them pretty regularly. But the that secondary attack rarely felt worthwhile, or rather, it rarely felt necessary. It was helpful. There was a couple bosses that were like multiple enemies, and it'd be helpful to just spam it and get a few hits on everybody and then sort of focus fire. But for the most part, I never felt like, oh, it's a good thing I had this extra powerful additional attack. It more felt like, all right, I'm in a fight, I'm going to burn through them all because whatever. And then you get them all back when you die. Mm-hmm. So it never really felt like incredibly valuable.
Yeah, kind of weird. I did really like the settings. Every zone you go to had a different theme, mm-hmm. and some of them were really cute. I especially liked the one that was like full of bats and skeletons and, the spooky house and everything. That was super good.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of speaks to one of the other things, just broadly speaking, that I think the game did really well was that variety. You kind of already spoke about all the different weapons, and while we didn't necessarily find them to be particularly useful, like it was still a cool variety, and the variety of settings is really fun in this game, and each with its own very unique looking art and a ton of little nice details. And then also there's an interesting attempt at a variety of gameplay. So, for the majority of the game, the vast majority is this top-down Zelda-like, but there are little things that they pop you into that completely change the game every once in a while. So, for instance, there's a section of the game that has you pretty frequently popping into a full 3D space, mm-hmm. Where you're going through a maze. It reminded me of that, also that old game on I don't know, I think we all had it on like Windows or whatever, where you're just dropping into a maze and you have to find those floating orbs. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, old man. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'll have to find it. I played it a ton. It always felt akin to all right, on my computer, I've got Ski Free. I've got this maze game. I
do remember there was that Windows 95 screensaver that this kind of reminded me of too, that was looked like brick walls and a little maze.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I'm talking about. Was that just a screensaver?
Was there an actual game for that? Because I only ever saw it as a screensaver.
I don't know, man.
This is wandering around an endless maze of brick walls.
This is a 30-year-old memory, so that might be just what it was. Yeah. It's fun though, because this is full, 1-bit art, and you're going through a 3D space, and there's treasure chests and dripping walls with foliage growing through the cracks, and a bunch of good little detail.
And it's not that actually was maybe more striking than I like the 1-bit top-down pixel art. It was very good, but it also was very retro and familiar.
Right.
Then when you switch into this, there wasn't a lot of it, but when you switch into this first-person 3D mode, I don't think I've seen a lot of games that have this particular aesthetic. It was kind of cool. I was reminded of I did play a little bit of this one first-person dungeon crawling thing called Delver a few years ago. That was kind of like a roguelike that did a similar kind of effect, where it was flat 2D pixel art, but arranged in first-person 3D, and not quite the same as Doom. It's kind of it's a very distinct aesthetic. It's high res, high res polygons, but low res textures, I guess. It's a weird aesthetic, and it's not something I've seen a whole lot of, and I don't know if it would work extended to a whole game here, but I actually think I was quite excited to see that happen. There are some shots of that in the trailer, so it's not a total surprise, but it still was quite surprising when you get dropped into it. It's I was playing a top-down 2D thing, and suddenly I'm having to kind of crawl through the walls and find a back way into places in this 3D sort of vent crawling kind of mode. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's mixed into a part of the game that also has sort of a stealth component. For the most part, this game is just go into a room, clear the room, and then you can go to the next spot. But they flip it by making you avoid skeletons that are on a defined patrol path and hiding behind boxes, and sort of straight up stealth game, which was a fun subversion of what you'd been doing through most of the game. Sort of a classic. You got caught. all your gear's gone, and now you have to maneuver your way around the prison before you can get all your shit back, and then go back through it and wreck house, which is always a satisfying thing, even if it's been done a ton. But like, again, good variety, like a good blend of things, especially for a 4-hour game. Being able to throw out all these different little mechanics and art styles was fun.
Overall, I liked the variety here. I just never got over the hurdle of like finding the fun in the combat. And that really was what brought this game down for me. Like, we talked about it a little bit already, but like it just feels slow and slippery to me. Like Kimuto, you can move around with the analog stick and he moves fluidly in any direction, but he's not very fast and he doesn't have any like cool moves. You can do a jump that feels a little bit kind of silly,
It is funny though. It's like fully animated. You do like a bunch of flips.
Yeah,
on each jump.
It's funny to look at, but it didn't feel like a good move. I would have liked a dash or something, a dodge roll,
because you can technically with the jump, like jump over attacks, jump over bad guys, but similar. Well, that's similarly to the special attack. Like I never really used it. Now I did die a bunch in this game, so maybe like both of us just didn't like click with what the combat was intended to be. Like maybe there was a style of playing this game that we didn't connect with that included a lot of jumping around and a lot of area of effect attacks, but it never felt like that was the ideal strategy, and so I never really clicked with it. And yeah, I think like ultimately the combat is kind of boring, and it is the main part of this game. Like, or at least it's the thing you're doing the most.
Yeah,
like
every screen, you enter the room, there are 3 or 4 or 2 enemies. They're all moving in their own little path, or they may just go straight for you, but mostly they're sort of moving around in a predictable way, and you go and kill them. And usually once you damage the enemies, a lot of them explode, and so you have to watch out for projectiles, or they're hurling projectiles for you, and you have to get past those on your way to kill them. And it just felt slow and floaty to me most of the time.
Yeah. I had a hard time identifying like the hitbox. Like I'd be like, I swear I'm hitting this guy. I'm like right next to it. This is one of the problems with like flat, 1-bit design is that I'm like, I swear I just hit him, but it didn't register as a hit. And I don't know if I was just like 3 pixels above too much. I don't know. And that is always a frustrating experience. And ultimately, I think it's a pretty damning that what I found is that unless the combat was required, which it often is the first time you enter into a room, but after that, once you've cleared it, the monsters will come back after you die, but the door that had to be opened by killing the monsters is open permanently, which is nice. And it ultimately meant that for the most part, I'm just running through these rooms. I avoided combat as much as I could in this game because it just wasn't very fun, and it was kind of a time sink. And also dying is kind of annoying, which we'll talk about in a minute. But ultimately, I was avoiding combat. And so, like, in a combat-heavy game, not having fun with it was really a big problem. And then also the puzzles I found to either be like incredibly obvious, like there's a switch over here, so push that box onto the switch, or like kind of incomprehensible. And I would kind of get through it through like brute force of just trying things. But like sometimes I'd get through a thing and be like, I don't really know what I did, but I got the door open. And
yeah, I felt the same kind of way in some of the areas, just navigating, because like that area with where you get where you lose your weapons and you have to escape, and stealth around the skeletons and everything. It's kind of a complicated map. I kind of just escaped by following the path of least resistance. It didn't really feel like I was exploring a space. It just sort of felt like I was, and that was also a point in the game where like there are maps in this game, but you didn't have a map for that section. And so I never felt like I like internalized the space and where I was, even though it is this pretty simple room to room, move up or left or down kind of thing. It just didn't quite click for me. And I sort of like found a key and unlocked a door and didn't ever really know like where I was looking for or where the door I was trying to unlock was. It just sort of happened. It felt like kind of moving from room to room randomly until I figured my way through. It just didn't quite feel great. Something about it is just off. It's so weird to get into a game like this where we're like, it's got a lot to recommend it, and then we're just not having that much fun.
It's just not that fun.
Why?
Yeah. I think it needed to be more challenging in a way that was actually satisfying and not just like tedious.
Yeah.
And that's obviously like really easy to say and harder to execute, you know? So like saying have better puzzles is not super helpful, but like ultimately the type of puzzles you're looking for in a game like this are the ones that make you feel kind of clever when you figure it out, or they test the skills that you've acquired through the game, you know, the ability, your combat ability or whatever it might be, or you've collected the item that you need to do in order to solve the puzzle. And for the most part, like it never hit any of those boxes. It was just either super obvious or entirely unclear. And I was not really like, hooray, I'm so smart, which is what you want from a puzzle, right?
Right.
And that with the sort of tedious combat really unfortunately led to, I think, an overall bland experience from a game that is really, I think, did a lot of the harder stuff correct, like the design and the writing and the music, like all of that is really, really good. I just wish it was
Speaking
more
of the
fun.
writing, one thing we haven't touched on yet is the weird thing that happens every time you, or not every time, but most of the time when you die in this game. If you die in this game, so first of all, like, I was never sure why this was at first, at least, but like the first time you die, you just come back. But every second time you die, why second time? I don't know. Every other time, you have a little conversation with Death, or a little Grim Reaper, who like scolds you for dying and offers to bring you back. And it's such a strange thing because, first of all, like every single time you do that, you have a little chat with Death, and it has a little bit of funny dialogue for him to say to you, which at first was funny and cute and interesting, but very quickly became annoying because he's got a lot to say every time, like a lot.
Yeah.
And you die and you want to jump right back in, and you can't because you have to like page through a bunch of pages of humorous dialogue, and you feel guilty for just wanting to like punch buttons through it to get back to where you were because you're missing something, but it's not so interesting that you are looking forward to dying or anything. And then every time he also gives you this choice, and I was really confused on what the meaning of this choice was, because he gives you an option to either pay him to resurrect you, and he takes half of your money that you've collected, or you can sign a contract. And what does the contract do? It doesn't really say in any clear way. And then I did that. I waited pretty late because I was like, if you're signing a contract that with Death, that can't be good. And then I did it, and it brought me back to life, and there were no consequences that I could perceive.
Yeah.
What did you ever find out what the deal was with that?
No idea, Raygan. And it also, I think there's a funny difference between you and I in here, because I signed the contract on my second death. And I also have no idea. Now, I think there is some translation issue going on in this game. Some of the, I don't believe English was the native language for this game. And
I think the developer's first language is Spanish, but I mean, I didn't have any issue understanding the English. There were occasional little translation quirks, or I assume they were, or they might have just been, odd phraseology that,
I'm wondering if there's something there that, like, because I also truly have no idea what signing that contract did for me. Other than that, I didn't have to pay the half my money every time. Which
did it just last forever after that? Like, did you?
Yeah. Well,
you didn't have to pay money again? Or?
No, never again. And
what the heck?
But there's the end of the game, and this is, big time spoiler territory. Death is the character of Death is a major part of the ending of the game. So I am wondering if there would maybe have been a different ending if we hadn't have signed the contract, because it's like, I don't remember the contract being a specific part of it, but like the ending is all about the character of Death. And so maybe that is where the impact is, but I really don't know. And yeah, I like the death cutscene after every other death started as very fun and funny. And that's where I was also thinking it felt like an Undertale joke, like talking to Death and like bargaining for your ability to come back. And Death is a really wacky character, that I think would have fit into like the Undertale world, which is
I could see that
where that kind of comp came from, or one of the elements that made me think of Undertale. And there's like little games Death has you play. I don't know how much you died if you got to these, where like it'll have 3 souls on the screen and you have to like, one of them murdered someone and they're all, it's sort of like who's like one's telling the truth and one's telling a lie, and you have to deduct who told the truth and who told a lie and who was the murderer.
I failed at that miserably.
Yeah, I got it, but there was nothing like, I don't know, I didn't seem like I got anything for having done that. And there was another one where you're saying, are they a good person or were they a bad person? You're either like damning their soul to hell or not. Like there were all these little death games that were like kind of fun and cute in and of themselves in that isolated moment. But it happens every other time you die. And it just gets to the point where like, I just want to get back into the game. Eventually, if you die enough, you clearly have exhausted the like written content, and it just goes to like a death answering machine that like plays the same thing every time. But even that is like 3 like taps of dialogue of like getting through this answering machine. So I'm like, I don't want to get through this answering machine either. It's like, I just want like, just get me back into the game.
Yeah, it was a bit much, especially after you've been, in an area and you're dying a bunch. It's just it was a weird thing because it's like it's a cute and clever idea that I got tired of very quickly. And that's the story of this game, is it's got a lot of cute and clever ideas that are, lots of good variety, but just nothing had enough sticking power or felt like viscerally cool enough to stick with it. So,
well, it kind of compounds, right? Because like the combat's not super fun. So you're just trying to get through it. And then most of the time I would die. It never, like most of the time, it didn't really feel like I died because of a lack of like skill, which I'm usually like, I don't know, like a hyper light drifter or whatever, like when you die, you're like, well, shit, like they got me. I could be better. I know what I did wrong. I know how I need to improve. This game, every time I died, I was like, ugh, I just felt like I like didn't, like it was too floaty, or I should have hit it. I swear I hit it, but like my hitbox didn't line up or whatever, and it killed me. And so then you have that, and it goes into yet another full-on cutscene with Death, who's going to tell you some extended long piece about the like the how tedious it can be, how tedious his job can be, collecting all these souls.
This is pretty damning, but like I'm trying to remember. I can't remember I kind of chuckled at some of them, but I can't remember a single joke that Death told in this game. Like, I don't know. Trying to remember them, and I can't think of it.
They're like individually kind of funny. Like if this happened a handful of times, I think it would have been fun and cute, and obviously Death plays a major part later. So like I understand the introduction of it as a character. Like it's all there to be good. It's too much. And I don't know if they thought people wouldn't die as much, which again could just be
very likely, pretty bad.
Yeah. So I don't know. It ultimately turned a fun thing into like an obnoxious thing that kind of drove me crazy.
I agree. Well, that's UnderDungeon, a game we wanted to like and had some good ideas, but ultimately fell pretty flat for us. So let's bring things up a little bit by talking about some things that made us happy this week. Nate, anything make you happy this week?
Yeah, so I don't often talk about like TV shows on this because I don't watch a lot of TV, and I feel like you guys do a great job of recommending great shows. But I have been watching a
Laura
show.
does, not
Laura,
me.
yeah, that's fair.
I don't watch enough TV either, honestly.
Yeah. But I have been watching something, and so if you've been listening to this show for a long time, you've heard me talk off and on about my like slow journey through the entire Star Trek catalog. I've spent the last 6 years basically watching Star Trek from the very beginning, and I am into now Discovery, and I've been watching everything from the beginning, like in order, in proper order, etc. But Discovery hasn't really been clicking for me, and so finally I thought, you know what, I'm going to break my order and I'm going to go into one of the Star Trek offshoots, and I'm going to watch Lower Decks. Are you familiar with
I'm
Star
familiar.
Trek?
I haven't watched any of it, but I've heard good things.
And Raygan, I'm loving it. It has been a breath of fresh air as far as Star Trek goes. It couldn't be any more unlike like Discovery or Enterprise, you know, the recent shows, and it's really fun. It's really funny. Obviously, there's a lot of turmoil right now around the brand I'm about to drop, but it has some people who were early from Rick and Morty involved in it. So it has the art style and some of the comedy is adjacent to like what Rick and Morty would be. So I mean that to say like way more modern than what you normally get from Star Trek from a humor standpoint, you know? So it's very modern in its comedy. It's really, really funny. And above all, though, it's a really good entry into the Star Trek world. Like it, I think, does a good job of still being a Star Trek show. And because it's animated, they can do whatever they want. And they have some beautiful animation in this show. It's one of the best parts of the whole thing is just how over the top and ridiculous they get with the animation. And like they get into all sorts of wild Star Trek style situations that a show wouldn't really be able to do, but they can do, you know, on this because it's animated. Like there's an episode where they encounter this goo that basically turns anything into a living element. And so having this goo attach itself to a starship and spread through the entire ship, turning everything into like living creatures is wild and not something you could do in like a live action TV show without an insane budget. But for this show, they're able to do it. And it's a cool Star Trek idea. And so I also like the perspective that, you know, the point of the show, Lower Decks, we're seeing all of Star Trek experiences from the perspective of people who just work like, I just work here, bro, you know?
That's awesome.
Which is, I mean, they're still like main character tropes, you know, and you see a lot, and they interact with like the bridge crew a ton, but it is still funny. Like a lot of the episodes are built around like, okay, today's trash day. So they have to go around and like clear all the trash out of the lower level of the starship that they're on, you know, because they're like entry level workers, so they have all the bullshit jobs that have to happen on the ship, and it's just kind of fun, you know. And I think they spend a lot of care to make sure that it still is in universe and like respectful of Star Trek's intent, and also helps.
That's exciting because my read on it was like this is a Star Trek parody, you know, when they showed, and like I'm sure there's elements of parody of the other shows in it, but it's encouraging to hear that it's actually making an effort to actually be a Star Trek as well.
Well, it's very self-aware, so which is again that sort of modern style humor that I'm talking about, where like so it takes place it's in universe, like not that long after. I think I read it's supposed to be like 3 or 4 years after Voyager. So like all of those characters from Star Trek that most people know and love, like Deep Space Nine, obviously Next Generation, Voyager, all that, they're like there and often doing cameos. Like Riker is in several episodes, and it really works too because it's animation, so they can just have them be their normal young selves. So these actors that played these roles 30 years ago,
get Jonathan Frakes to phone in, and he can do the voice over the phone.
Yeah,
no big deal.
Yeah, and like Q is there. It's a bunch of the like characters that you like, and it's just their voice, so it still works. They don't look like the old people that they've become. And it like they talk about a bunch of shit that has happened in the previous series and kind of make fun of it or reference it. Like it really works having just watched a ton of all of the other Star Trek series. It's kind of like an homage to every other series while also just being like way dumber than any act. like Star Trek always takes itself so seriously, which I like. And this show is the opposite of that. Like it's going to make like poop jokes and stuff like that throughout it. And it works. So I've been really enjoying it. Molly and I've been watching it together. She's been really enjoying it. So it's also not what I was expecting. I was kind of expecting it, like you were saying, to be more of a parody. And it's not being mean to Star Trek. It actually is pretty loving towards like the universe that it's being ridiculous in.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So recommend it.
Awesome. I don't have as good of a recommendation. In fact, I don't really have much of a recommendation for you this week. But I was the thing that's making me most happy, Nate, I already mentioned this to you. It's why you listeners may be hearing some background noises behind me in the episode. Hopefully not too much. Is that I am getting a new hot water system.
Hell yeah.
In my house. Yeah, so we've been having an issue with our hot water for a while. I live in a kind of a big 2-floor house with the hot water heaters were up in the attic. And we have like a dual tank hot water heater system thing. And is a little old. And it was getting worse.
Big flex coming here from Raygan with his 2 water tanks.
Oh, yeah. No, it's not a big flex when apparently one of the 2 water heaters had been getting worse and worse and eventually stopped working entirely. And it just happened like right at the big, it had been getting slowly worse for a while. We'd had some other issues with the water system. And then right before the beginning of winter, I think it just started getting way worse. And I had chalked it up to, well, we know we've been having some issues with the hot water and sometimes it takes a really long time to get hot. And also it's been getting colder. And so maybe it's just not getting as hot because the water coming into the house is really cold. And we were just sort of like slowly making excuses for our hot water being worse and worse and worse until finally recently, there was just no denying it. We were like getting into the shower, turning the hot water all the way up to 100% hot. And it was still kind of cold and just like nothing's working right, man. This sucks. It wasn't totally cold, but it was just like, just warm enough where you're like, well, I guess this is okay, but like at 100% hot on the dial, right? So finally called in some guys, the plumbers came in, took a look and they're like, well, there's your problem. One of my 2 hot water heaters was completely failed and the other one was not keeping up. It was just mixing 50-50 hot and cold water every time I ran the hot water and just a terrible experience. And so we finally decided to spend too much money and we're installing a what do you call it? Like a tankless system. And I can't wait, man, to just scald my ass tomorrow. Just pour it on. Just turn me pink and red. Like, give me blisters. I want the hot.
For this. This is what I want. I paid for this.
Right. So that's what's making me happiest right now. I'm kind of excited. It's right now there's guys in my attic replacing those 2 things. I've never been super comfortable with the idea that I had 2 large tanks of water sitting above my house. It just seemed bad from a gravity perspective and safety and like not destroying my house if one of them leaks or something. So I'm also glad from that perspective, just to not have hundreds of pounds of water above my head all the time anymore.
And hey, listeners, listen, during the upcoming water wars, which we all know are coming, Raygan no longer has hundreds of gallons of waters squirreled away in his attic. So don't come trying to eat him and his family in order to get to his precious, precious water.
No, we're just going to have like 2 gallons in each toilet tank and that's it.
So, I mean, you can still go and get all of his retro hardware, which will surely be valuable in our post-water environment, but
you can't drink CRTs.
You can't. Yeah. Well, I'm happy for you. That is that sounds like quite the improvement. I mean,
I can't wait, man.
That is like, I think the main reason to stay at a hotel at this point is the like seemingly unlimited hot water. And so you're getting that hotel experience in your own home.
I'm gonna steam up the mirrors, man.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. So that's it for this week's short game. Thank you for joining us on this episode. That was just me and Nate, a good throwback to short game times of yore. We're going to be coming back next week with some great new games. It's been a good time recently. I'm not actually sure what we're covering next, but there's some really good stuff on our list of maybes. So I'm excited to play games. We have some good new releases recently. Find our show. We're on all the places. Easiest way to find all of our links to everything is to go to shortgame.omg.lol. And that's a nice little page where you'll have links to subscribe on all the podcast apps. You'll have links to all of our social media profiles, links to send us an email, whatever you want to do to contact the show, to our Patreon. Our show is supported by you, the listeners, on Patreon, patreon.com/theshortgame. And every one of our listeners gets access, every one of our patrons gets access to our Discord server where we chit-chat about the games that we're playing. We talk about upcoming episodes. We talk about episodes that have just come out. And we just share generally what's making us happy on there too. So it's a great place to come if you want to suggest a game or talk about the games we're covering on the show. And you can support at just $1 a month, or if you support at the $5 a month level, I will send you some stickers, some short game stickers. Let's see. Anything else? You can find me on Mastodon. I'm Raygan, Raygan, at bird.rodeo. And Nate, where can people find you?
Well, I'm there on Mastodon now too, Raygan. I'm Nate at bird.rodeo. What a normal user handle. Bird.rodeo. I love it. I am also still, at least for now, on Twitter at NateSTO.
Yes, and listeners, and of course, our show's on Twitter at _shortgame or on Mastodon at shortgame at zork.social. And once again, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.